Wait! I'm a what? Written by Artina Blackcharm. Chapter 12. When does fishing actually result in fish? Summary. Danny's fishing skills are effective, but questionable. The sun was high in the sky, even if barely anyone could tell through the gloomy grey and pollution. Danny could always tell where he was. Nothing would ever change that. It was a regular day. Danny stopped by Miss Shooney's, just checking on whether or not Cookie decided to escape for another adventure. He ate a sandwich and wondered about the new recipe Miss Shooney had in mind. Cookie kept looking at the door, slowly crawling towards it and perking up whenever they heard someone in the hallway. Gotham was restless too. Then he could hear the growing whine of the subway underground, honks from traffic, and the squeeze of someone gripping a letter tightening. Uneasy. Through a regular day, something was amiss, and Danny followed the sound of restless limbs and fidgeting. He found himself at the end of a street and waiting. Not a moment later, there was a truck flying down the street. Something was going on. It wasn't hard to notice for the bats, birds, and occasional cats. Jason had found 3 more drug dealers trying to sell dirty shit in his territory. Each was originally from different areas of Gotham, but had all been paid good money to stir trouble in his crime alley. Catwoman, a long hair, teasing of Batman, hinted that a client had tried to backstab her, a rare thing to happen considering that she was one of the best in her business, and with words from her you could get blacklisted from the more convenient side of attaining art pieces, and the like. The Deathstroke had even paid Nightwing a visit with the news that someone was trying to set a bounty on his head. Of course, it was only after a rather prolonged and unnecessary fight that he finally told Nightwing that he didn't actually take the job. Oracle had even reported some meager attempts at hacking the city system and inquiries on Robin. Red Robin had to step in for a bit when it started interfering with a case he was conducting with Robin's assistance. Unsurprisingly, Black Bat had nothing to report, and neither did Spoiler by association. Then there was a name that kept popping up. Black Mask, a man Jason had gone against with no lack of mercy when he first owned the Red Hood name, a man that was dead after one of many explosive encounters Hood had with him, though apparently it seems otherwise. Slowly, these incidents had come together, and the connecting factor was Jason. Red Hood wasn't known as someone who worked with the bats. At most, there were reports citing of Red Robin and Hood, though anyone would say that those had looked less than friendly from an outsider view. Most would say that Hood kept his distance, and that worked fine for Jason, but apparently Black Mask thought otherwise, though his ammo was off, which could mean any number of things, as Batman so thoroughly informed them. Ever the paranoid man had tried to make them as prepared as possible, except plans could always go wrong, even for someone who could see that before it even happened. Signal would say that he was particularly good at handling daylight robberies. There was a certain pattern that showed up while the sun was up compared to when things were carried out in the dead of the night. Duke was good at noticing patterns and being 5 steps ahead even before his meta power showed him. But for some reason, in the most unusual series of events that had Duke questioning whether he was seeing it right, he had become victim to a robbery, now turned kidnapping, especially kidnapping him. He had heard countless stories from the others, getting kidnapped both as vigilantes and in civilis, and while he laughed at some of the stories they told, he found nothing particularly amusing about the hands grabbing at him and cursing. The voices yelled at each other with no sense of order, and for some reason decided to get samples and then proceeded to try and assemble his suit in a moving van. It didn't help that Signal's comms weren't working anymore either. The idiots didn't even have the proper tools to do anything of the sort, and Signal would bet that the syringe one of them pulled out was anything but sanitary. He almost wondered whether he had even woken up that morning, and this was an unusual dream when all he could prepare himself for was the sudden shift that the van was about to go through. The van's side door opened. By some unseen force, Signal found himself airbound before hitting his head and hearing a very distinct crack of his helmet before the air was knocked out of him. Catching his breath, he could see the sky, the familiar gray, before something stepped into his line of sight. All he could see was black, and then he was awake no more. He couldn't tell how long it had been when he woke up again, still only seeing black. Something soft was covering his eyes, his now very exposed eyes. He didn't move. There was the sound of other people in the room, shuffling of clothes and breaths, but nothing was restraining Signal. And when he thought about it, he was actually on something soft too. It felt like a mattress. There was more shuffling of feet, and suddenly a young voice, a kid, asked, "So, you're gonna steal their kneecaps?" The shuffling feet stopped, and Signal didn't dare move. There was a scoff, and a much older voice, possibly around his age, spoke. "No." "When do you steal someone's kneecaps?" another kid asked. "When the moment comes, you will know," the older voice said. How you knew when to do that, Signal didn't know. "But if it does, come and get me." "Hey, I think he's awake," Kid 1 said. "Please don't steal my kneecaps," Signal said, because there was no point in pretending to be asleep anymore. And he had a feeling he wasn't in danger compared to before. "I like where they are." At his words, there were some giggles around, what sounded like a small room. They all sounded young. Then there was something patting his knee softly. "Don't worry." It was the older voice again. "No kneecap stealing today. Anyways, how are you feeling?" The question was as genuine as how Dick would ask it after a rough mission or just a bad day. It was said gently, with eyes watching for any tell that revealed an injury he was trying to hide. "Could be better, but can you tell me where I am?" Signal asked. Seeing as the last he remembered was being thrown out of the van on an unknown road. After that, there was nothing until he woke up. Before the older voice could answer, there was suddenly an outlash of voices cutting in, a series of rumbling that was a retelling of what happened. From the bit Signal could understand, the van had been particularly flying down the street when it suddenly turned and the door opened. Then Signal fell out, bouncing on the road. According to Kid 2, before the van kept driving off, there was more, but it was getting harder to understand as they started to argue. Finally, the older voice cut in effectively, silencing the others. "Sorry about that, Signal. The Little Shadows are a curious bunch. Though none of them have messed with your things or tried to see your face. I got my eye on them." That sounded sincere too, but Signal could never be too careful. "So you didn't look?" Signal asked, "even to see if I was okay after bouncing on the ground?" Signal wouldn't exactly be able to fault him if they did. Checking pupillary response was one of the basics. "Well," the older voice stated, "if there was something serious other than a bonk, then your shadow would have been more worried. Say, you're not trying to sneak a peek, are you? I promise I'm not a 40-year-old man living in a basement with a questionable search history." Signal couldn't help but quirk his lip. "All right, so you're not a catfish, which doesn't even apply to this situation." The stranger had to have been smiling from the way they sounded when they said, "Correct, Signal. I am who I am, and who I ever shall be. No fishing of any sort going around here. I'm actually horrible at fishing. Wow, must be a real bummer. Oh, definitely, considering my plans to go fishing this afternoon. But instead I'm reeling a signal. I bet no less. They sighed, good-naturedly. Just my luck. Hey, Signal said with fake offense. I'm a great catch. Are they flirting? One of the little shadows asked. Signal couldn't blame himself for being unable to keep the laugh that trickled out considering the absurdity of the situation and where the best conversation had gone. The stranger had to have thought the same as they laughed too before they said, "Lesson to be learned here. Don't flirt with someone injured and who you don't even know. And when you listening? We are talking about my horrible fishing skills. Not much flirting, Dad, and if you think so, then I don't know what to tell you, other than I wish you luck in the future." Silence was their response. "They don't believe you, do they?" Signal asked. Another sigh. "Nope, not one bit, and here I thought I had smart shadows. Say, wanna switch?" "Nah, I'm attached to mine." "Damn." There were some more whispers from the kids. "I still think they are flirting." Then they asked louder, "Are we gonna have another Catwoman and Batman situation? 'Cause I don't think my sister will let me hang around you if you do." There were some more giggles before the older voice cut in, sputtering. "Agents, no. This is not another situation. Do not tell your sister that. I swear I just got her to stop nagging me before. Don't give her more ammo. And for all I know, Signal here could be a 40-year-old man living in someone's basement with a questionable search history." "Dude," Signal cut in, "are you calling me a catfish?" "No, I'm calling you a badfish." "No way that's real," one of the kids said. "Yes, it is," the older voice said. "Scientific name orcophyllate. It's a type of anglerfish, but I could call him sea bat too, or handfish." "I prefer sea bat." Signal would never get any peace if someone started to call him handfish. There were still some whispers from the little shadows. "I'm putting 2 tracks and a candy bar on him getting a boyfriend. I blanket on a messy breakup, or some shit like that." And another young voice deadpanned. "I will have you know," the older voice said, "I already have one true love." "Yeah, and who is that?" There was a moment of silence before a small deadpan voice said, "You're literally pointing at the ceiling." "Oh shit, he's gonna go on about stars again." "Hey, I take offense to that. Didn't you know that the Signal felt oddly at ease with the descent of voices into a small scuffle with small curses, laughter, and the familiar sound of someone getting elbowed in the gut. It reminded Duke of his time before being Signal. The "We Are Robin" era, where a bunch of kids his age, younger than he was now, and some older, came together. He remembered that they had done some crazy shit, but there had also been some moments like the one he could hear happening beside some moments were dressed in Robin's colors. They were just kids being kids, whether it was before or after they took to the streets. Sometimes Duke missed it. Eventually the little shadow scuffle came to an end. What sounded like the beginning of a space theme-related ramble was detoured. One of the kids huffed and sounded like they slumped against the floor, and onto another kid. "Never mind. They're not flirting. He's too obsessed with the freaking Big Dipper." Another shuffle began to stop. Another space ramble, and seemingly given up on the space facts, the older voice spoke again. "So, Seabed, anything we civilians should be worried about, considering it looks like you got snatched up? And wasn't that the question of the day?" Signal was sure that Tim or Bruce were going to come up with countless theories, though it seemed more likely to be that Jason had told him about Black Mask. "Did those guys get a good look at you?" Signal asked them, because there was always a chance that the robbers turned kidnappers would come back. Really did they like witnesses. Don't worry about me, Seabed. Those guys were a bit busy to even catch a glimpse of me, and the little shadows live up to their name. There was a pause. Only thing they saw was you on the street, like a fish out of water. You know, Nightwing would like you, Signal said, because Nightwing really would. He would have been eating this up if he could have heard it through the calms that were out at the moment. Sticking to your wordplay and all that. The stranger hummed. I see. A man of culture. But anyway, again, just you and some parts of what I'm guessing is your suit. I collected those bits too. They're in a bag. No one's touched them. Suddenly fabric was settled in his hands. Parts of his suit were sticking out through the bag. Tim and Bruce would be less than happy about having it detached from where it should be. But it was better than if someone else had gotten a hand on them. Bruce more so, since Tim would have stayed up trying to track those pieces down, along with workshopping the current designs to make it harder to be taken apart again. Getting Tim to rest more and keeping him away from his energy drinks was a constant battle, one that Bruce was losing by a great margin without Alfred's assistance. So, Signal said, if I'm Seabed, what exactly do I call you? He needed a name, at least, other than stranger. Another hum. I will leave that up to you, Seabed. I can't be having all the fun here. You're the one currently awaiting medical attention. Wait, Medi? Yes, and I would love it if you beds would stop needing it. The familiar, exasperated voice of one Dr. Leslie Tompkins said. Signal could envision the look she was probably giving him at that very moment. Well, the still unnamed voice said, I will leave you here with the good doc. I'm sure she'd be able to get you patched up so you can return to the sea where you belong. With that, Signal found himself at the mercy of the good doctor, who in a talented way managed to get him back to her clinic without anyone being none the wiser, along with him unable to even catch a glimpse of where he had been and who the voices had belonged to. It didn't exactly bother him, but back home, while verbally giving a report, while lying on the couch in one of Jason's hoodies that he would deny ever stealing, he knew he'd have to let them know too. Alfred, Dick, and Bruce had already given him a once-over, and other than some bruises and a slight headache, he was deemed okay. Tim was already going over with Bats to see why his comm and tracking had cut out earlier that day. Do you know who you spoke to after waking up? Bruce asked, and Duke sighed. Nope. He had no clue as to who was the mystery voice, only that they were older than the kids, and probably around his age. They most likely lived in a place that wasn't a legal residence. It explained how when he got up, he could feel the mattresses had been on the floor, and he didn't hear any presence of an adult except for the dog. He could ask Dr. Tompkins. Stephanie suggested she must have seen them. Sorry to say, Duke answered before anyone else could. That won't work, patient's confidentiality and all that. The civilian was hurt? Bruce asked. Duke laughed, remembering his sorry when he had asked the doc the same. Don't know, Bee. But he got some sort of treatment from her, and she said that he sounded sincere about following the necessary aftercare, she told him. And I think she was making more of a dig at you, to be honest, considering, and this was her words, that you think you have superhuman healing. Dick snorted at Bruce's response, and the dig from Leslie. She tended to sneak in those comments, considering their tendency to not actually commit to her recommended rest and healing time required for all the injuries they collected over the years. As Dick started to recount a couple of other little digs various family friends had made regarding Bruce's self-care, Duke let him close his eyes. When someone got any sort of treatment from Leslie, she always held up it confidentially. Everyone knew that. So if she knew this mystery voice, she'd really be the only one. A small part of Duke couldn't help but feel relieved that it was kept a secret. That voice, that person, he sounded kind, caring, close with the ones he called little shadows, and he had been nice enough to help Duke in the first place. Not a lot of folks would have done that. Not a lot would have kept from trying to see who it was underneath the mask. But the stranger went out of their way to cover his face and reassure him with a sincerity that was a rarity to hear in Gotham, much less believe. Duke would feel uncomfortable with them being put under the scrutiny that came with anything Batman decided to investigate. So Duke relaxed to the murmur of voices. The last thing on his mind was the search result when he looked up seabed and found a photo of the little bottom feeder fish. Though it was better looking than an anglerfish, it would be best to keep the namesake away from Duke and the others, especially Jason. That guy could be such an ass about names. Then he watched as Dr. Tompkins led Signal away, happy that Snaps knew exactly where to go to find the dog. Zippers mentioned that Dr. Tompkins had helped out with Snap's sister a few times before over the years, and Danny was sure that he had heard Adrian threaten to go to the dog during one of his fights with Panty, who responded with, "Don't bring Leslie into this." Gotham was ever present when Snap showed up with the doctor in tow, quicker than they should have been. Their shadows were more lively than usual, especially when Signal had fallen out of the truck. They had reached out to cover the vigilante's face when his helmet broke, staying there when Danny came near. Not that he'd ever try to look and go against Gotham's wishes. After all, he was supposed to help her. He had easily gathered the different pieces of the suit scattered on the ground into a bag, thanking the tendrils of light and darkness that pushed them closer to him, and how they were sure to keep Signal's head stable. And Danny picked him up and took him into the observatory, quicker than anyone could see. Danny heard a lot of good things about Signal, one of the few vigilantes that was seen in the daylight. That and how the shadows and Gotham reached out so lovingly to him led Danny to be at ease with having a stranger in his haunt. It was only after he had Signal situated on the mattress that the little shadows showed up, the more human inclined, ever curious to see what Danny was up to. They had all huddled in front of him, asking questions and waiting for something to happen while Snaps had gone to get the doctor. It was good that it hadn't taken long before Signal woke up, and then he got to enjoy some playful banter, never mind the teasing from the kids. "Said your boyfriend is leaving?" a voice asked, and then he was pulled away from focusing on the doctor's exit from his haunt to look at a smug Zipper. "They're not my boyfriend," Danny deadpanned. Zipper just nodded their head, still smug as ever. "Ah, significant other then. Nice to see more diversity. My shoulders are getting pretty sore from all the carrying." And he stared at Zipper, and then at Eric, who was watching the interaction. No doubt Eric would report to his sister that Danny supposedly had a situation. Danny sighed before standing up and placing a hand on Zipper's head before pushing down, effectively making them squawk as their hair was messed up. "Go to Veronica," he said, addressing the two of them. "She needs some taste testers that aren't Gita. Apparently it's a spicy chili, and Gita has a low tolerance." Eric nodded as if given a mission, while Zipper tried and failed to remove Danny's hand from his head. When he finally did, Danny made sure to step out of the room before Zipper could catch him, though he could hear the call of "Come on, boss!" amidst Eric's laughter, and what was sure to be a bird's nest on the other's head.